listening to a GWP weekly recap. It's January 30th, 2026. I'm your host, Jacob Fulmer, and in today's top news stories, we've got another government shutdown that could happen as soon as tonight. There's federal charges after a town hall attack against Ilhan Omar. And then we're also looking at the possibility of Europe doing a World Cup boycott. And then we're going to be previewing the big launch. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then we'll also look at some weather and sports, including a big winter storm and just kind of looking at some big sporting events that we have going on in the month of February. So quite a bit to get to tonight on this weekly recap. Of course, these weekly recaps are done on Friday evenings, unless we have new episodes, which we will have a new episode next Friday. So we won't actually have a weekly recap. And actually, the same can be said about the following Friday as well. So these don't necessarily happen every Friday. They mainly happen on Fridays that we don't have other things going on the Great World Productions. But of course, tonight we are looking at the second weekly recap. Of course, these are about half the length of our normal weekly news. Just keep that in mind. It's more of a summary than it is an actual news like we do on Mondays. So, of course, we're going to start off with our top story being the government shutdown tonight. Of course, we know that the Senate was back in session today as of 11 a.m. Eastern Time to discuss potential spending legislation. Of course, the two different houses of Congress have gone back and forth on this different issue with different resolutions that have been proposed. But at this point in time, neither house has passed anything that would prevent this government shutdown. Of course, today is the very last day in order to meet that deadline where the government would go into a partial shutdown. Of course, this comes just months after the longest shutdown in U.S. history. And so that took place as of midnight on September 30th, this one of last year. And this one, of course, would happen today, January 30th of 2026. Now, we know that 750,000 employees were placed on unpaid leave during the shutdown last year. We also know that a previous shutdown that wasn't nearly as long as this past one back in 2018 and 2019 caused an $11 billion loss, or that was the impact, the economic impact from the shutdown in 2018 and 2019. And as of right now, we also know that the House is not going to be in session for the rest of this week and the weekend. And so that does mean that it appears that we will be going into another partial shutdown. Again, about 70% of the government would go under shutdown, or at least 70% of the funding would go into a shutdown. If it was passed today through the Senate, then it would still have to go through the House. House Speaker Johnson commented towards USA Today that would not happen until at the very earliest next Monday on February 2nd. And so that's the earliest that the House may debate and vote on that particular issue. So again, a government shutdown is certainly imminent at this point in time. And in fact, it looks as though we may be just hours away from that taking place, as the Senate is going to be have to vote on that issue as we go into Monday. And then, of course, we also need the president's signature in order to avoid that shutdown, although it looks like that we will be going into a partial government shutdown, at least for a few days until that vote can take place from the House. Of course, the Senate is hoping to pass the legislation today, but it would not go through the House until Monday and would probably not reach the president's desk until the very earliest next Tuesday. So it's very likely that we could be looking at the very least, a 3 to 4 day government shutdown based on where we're at as of right now within Congress, which of course can be very costly, as we saw back during that shutdown in 2018 and 2019. And we'll go ahead and we'll move into our next top news story here for this evening. This goes back to an event that occurred Tuesday evening where a 55-year-old male attacked House Representative Miss Ilhan Omar at a town hall meeting. This came just seconds after, in her speech, she was talking about how she was encouraging the Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem in order to resign. That's what she was talking about in her speech. And just as that happened, again, this was in a town hall meeting on Tuesday, just as that happened, a 55-year-old man who we now know is Anthony J, and I'm going to say his last name wrong. I'm sorry about that. It's a Casimir Zach. That's the best that I can pronounce it. Um, and so, of course, there were federal charges that were presented on Thursday against him after he attacked her with a syringe of what we now know is apple cider vinegar. This was according to ABC News. He claims to have squirted vinegar at her before he was then tackled by the security that was present at this time. But either way, again, the security was able to take care of this issue that took place very quickly. Of course, with the Minnesota representative criticizing Homeland Security to resign. Of course, there's been a lot of pushes for that. Of course, we've even talked about the possibility of impeachment across many of the different cabinet members for the president's cabinet. And so this comes just a moment after the representative was talking about that. So that's really all the details we have at this point in time on that. But certainly quite a story that unfolded earlier on Tuesday. Luckily, the Minnesota representative Ilhan Omar is totally fine after all of that took place. Again, that is U.S. representative. Also, just a little bit of additional information that we know is that she has served on the Minnesota House of Representatives at one point in time, and of course now serves as a Minnesota representative for the U.S. House of Representatives. So that kind of leads us into our next story, which is, of course, about the World Cup boycott that is taking place. Many countries have expressed the possibility of boycotting the World Cup. We know that Germany has been one of the countries that has talked about this. Of course, South Africa, the opposition leader, Julius Millennium, has called for the national team to withdraw from the tournament. So um, that's of course. We've also had Spain. The Spanish government has hinted at a potential boycott if Israel is there. So again, it's just with a lot of the different tensions that we've had across the Middle East, as well as some of the talk about Greenland. Just with all of that going on, these different tariffs that Trump had talked about previously has a few countries on edge, and so that is at least a possibility at this point that we could have multiple different countries that could be involved in that. It is important to note here at this point in time that no countries have actually officially decided to boycott the World Cup, but there has been significant pressure for certain countries to withdraw from the tournament, again, with the potential of Israel withdrawing, or at least that's what Spain is looking for at this point in time. So again, just lots of conflict regarding that. But again, at this point in time, no countries have officially boycotted at this point in time. So that's really all the news that we have on that. So, and then our final news story for tonight in this weekly recap is we're going to be previewing a series that we're going to be doing a little bit later in the month of February, which is over Artemis 2. Artemis 2 is NASA's first crewed mission of the Artemis program and is scheduled to launch as early as Sunday, February 8th on a 10-day flight around the moon. Now, something that we do need to know is that this weekend they were scheduled to do what is considered to be like their test run, I guess you could say. And so they weren't able to do that today, partially because of the colder temperatures up in the atmosphere. So it's not just about what happens at the surface, it's also up in the atmosphere as well. And so The launch has been delayed a little bit. There is a possibility that this could be delayed as late as April, but it could happen as early as next weekend. The original launch date was this upcoming Friday, or the following Friday, I should say, a week from today, on February 6, 2026. But now that launch has been postponed to, at the very least, Sunday, February 8th of 2026. Of course, that's also the same day of the Super Bowl, which we'll be talking about a little bit more. More on this news story next week. So next week, we're going to be covering this just a little bit more in the weekly news. All right, that is it for our top news stories. Now we'll go into weather. Weather here. We're going to start off by looking at some current weather alerts that we have across the country. We've got winter storm warnings from Georgia to up into Virginia, including the Carolinas, where we are looking at the possibility of some heavy snow with a winter storm. We've also got those cold weather advisories here across Missouri into Kansas and further to the south with some of those extremely cold temperatures. We've got extreme cold warnings across this darker blue. So just lots of different winter weather still ongoing. Of course, this comes after last weekend's winter storm that we covered quite a bit with some different live updates and some weather updates during the weekend. There's still quite a few power outages from that winter storm. So we've now been dealing with these power outages for about 5 or 6 days at this point in time, with the state of Mississippi still at about 84,000 customers without power. In fact, if we go a little bit closer, you'll notice that central and northern Mississippi still lots of customers without power. This is, of course, where we had over an inch of ice, which brought down some of those power lines. We've also got Louisiana, Tennessee, so a couple of states still in those 10,000 outages or more for 3 different states, with a total of 240,000 power outages. Of course, with this weekend's winter storm, we're tracking some very strong winds, especially for like the Outer Banks. And so we could see additional power outages added to this list because of this weekend's winter storm. This power outage map is found at poweroutage.com is where you can find this. Of course, this is from the Storm Prediction Center's NOAA's National Weather Service watches, warnings, and advisories. You can find this at spc.noaa.gov/products/WWA/. That's where we're getting these different weather alerts. Oh, and then I guess while we're on here as well, we also do have a winter weather advisory across Montana and North Dakota for some additional wintry weather tonight. So, of course, we looked at MoDot quite a bit for the different road conditions during winter weather. We do actually still have a few roads that are snow covered across southeastern Missouri, even several days later. It's taken quite a long time, but we did see over a foot of snow in some areas across Missouri, and so that certainly has factored into it taking such a long time for that to occur. Traveler.modot.org/map/ that, of course, is where you can find MoDot's um, MoDot's map here showing those winter weather road conditions. So, as far as that storm that we're tracking across the southeastern part of the U.S., this is from the GFS model. This is all from tropicaltidbits.com, is where we're getting this 12Z run for today of the GFS model. And you can see that some of that heavier snow is going to be moving into the Carolinas. So we have a storm system that's going to be developing here off the East Coast, bringing in those chances for snow. It's going to rapidly intensify. And so you'll notice how the pressure goes from like 998 millibars on Saturday evening to Sunday evening. Went off the map here, to Sunday evening where it'll have 966 millibars. And so that is certainly something that we need to watch, because it's going to be, that pressure is going to be dropping dropping so rapidly here. And so, again, the worst of the impacts, the heaviest of the snow is going to begin tonight around 6 p.m. to midnight Eastern time. And then that's going to start to move into the Carolinas. Again, heavy amounts of snow. We could see snowfall rates at up to an inch per hour across this area. This is going to continue through tomorrow, even into Sunday. And then by Sunday evening, this storm system will move off the coast. There is something that we call the 40/70 benchmark. And so that determines whether or not a storm system will be like a nor'eastern or not. And so the 40/70 benchmark is roughly about right here is where it is. And so basically, not quite as you can see, but on the coordinate points, but around here is where that benchmark is. So anytime the storm passes to the east, that means that a lot of our impacts are going to stay off the coast. And so not a whole lot of precipitation is expected here across the Northeast, maybe a couple of inches right along the East Coast, particularly here in Massachusetts. That is a possibility. Of course, snowfall totals across the Carolinas are going to be anywhere from about 4 to 8 inches, according to the GFS model. A couple of isolated totals a little bit higher are going to be possible, with again lighter amounts expected across the Northeast, with not a whole lot in the way of accumulation. What about across the rest of the country? Of course, that's the big story. There's also going to be some very strong winds, 60 to 70 miles per hour with that. But what about other stories? We've got a weak wave that's going to bring some snow across the northern plains over the weekend. A little bit of that could make it into Missouri, not expecting a whole lot out of that. And then you'll notice another storm system here as we go into Tuesday and Wednesday. That could bring us some moisture across Missouri, most likely either some rain or some snow, but it's hard to tell at least this far out in the forecast, but that is certainly a possibility. As far as the GFS models temperature run from that 12Z run, of course, staying well below average through this weekend. We could even see temperatures dipping below zero. So dangerously cold wind chills will be expected across the area as we go into this weekend. Tonight is going to be the coldest night, so make sure to bundle up if you have to go outside. But much warmer temperatures are expected as we go into next week. Temperatures returning to above average here, as you can see by the Climate Prediction Center, with that 6 to 10 day outlook from February 4th to February 8th, likely going to be near average or just slightly above average. And so that means that we certainly will be looking at the possibility of temperatures returning above freezing later this weekend, but especially into next week, temperatures returning into the 40s. Now we'll move into sports. All right, and now we are going to go ahead and move into sports. Of course, February is just around the corner, with February 1st coming this Sunday. And so that means that we are about to move into the shortest month of the year, of course, but it's one of the busiest months for some really big sports that are going to be happening. Of course, on February 1st is when the 2026 Australian Open is going to be coming to a conclusion. This started back on January 18th. So we'll have to see what ends up happening with that. Of course, we've also got the 2026 Winter Games that are going to be taking place in Milan, Italy, at least where most of that's going to be taking place from February 6th to 22nd of February. So another big sporting event that's going to be taking place. Coverage of that is going to be on NBC. So you can expect to see that. You can also expect to see a brand new special episode here on the Great World Podcast. We're going to be doing that on the opening night of the Winter Olympics, which again is this Friday, February 6th. So brand new episode coming your way this coming Friday. We've also got a special episode on the Super Bowl. That's actually going to be the following day. So we're going to have episodes on back-to-back days next Friday and Saturday. Friday, February 6th with the Winter Olympics opening ceremony, and then Saturday, February 7th with the Super Bowl 60 60th special that we are going to be doing here on the Great World Podcast, all leading up to the Super Bowl itself, which again is going to be on February 8th, with that episode about it premiering on February 7th on Saturday. So February 8th, 2026 is when the 60th Super Bowl will be taking place. Levi Stadium, Santa Clara, California is going to be the location of that, home of the 49ers. So that's another big event. And then in the week following, of course, the Winter Games are still going to be happening during this time, but we're also going to have the 2026 Daytona 500. That's going to be taking place there at the Daytona International Speedway in Daytona, Florida. Again, that's going to be taking place from February 11th, which is of course, on a Wednesday, and that's going to be continuing until Monday, February 16th. So we've got four big sporting events, one, of course, concluding this Sunday on February 1st, and then we've got the Winter Games and the Super Bowl beginning the weekend after that, and then the Daytona 500 in the following week as well. So lots of big sporting events that are going to be coming up in the coming weeks. And then two other things that we're going to be covering in today's sports segment of this weekly recap is that we've got a really big matchup and big rivalry tonight in men's college basketball. You'll have to check out number 3 Michigan as they take on number 7 Michigan State. That is going to be coming up tonight at 7 p.m. And then we've also got Dayton taking on number 21 St. Louis at 7 p.m. as well. So a couple of big matchups. One, of course, being a big in-state rivalry with Michigan and Michigan State, both top 10 teams in men's college basketball. So a couple of big matchups in store for you. Of course, we've also got some other big matchups tomorrow that's going to be taking place. Cincinnati going to Houston. Houston's number 10. That game's going to be starting at noon Eastern time. The times that I gave you before were in Central Time, so 7 p.m. tonight at Central Time, 8 p.m. tonight Eastern. We've also got Pittsburgh and Clemson. Clemson's ranked 22. That's going to be tomorrow. We've got Virginia and Boston College taking place. And then the number 1 team in the nation, still undefeated, has a big rivalry coming up tomorrow at 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central. That's going to be Arizona State. Arizona State rather is not ranked, but Arizona still being that number 1 undefeated team. So we'll have to see if they can stay undefeated against their rival. We've also got several other big games, including BYU at number 13, taking on Kansas, number 14. That's going to be tomorrow at 4:30 Eastern. We've got Ole Miss and Vanderbilt, very big SEC matchup as well, with Vanderbilt being ranked number 18. Ole Miss currently not ranked. That game 6 p.m. tomorrow. Kentucky and Arkansas also facing off. Arkansas at the number 15 spot. And then we've also got Gonzaga as well. The number 6 team, they're going to be playing in the late night game at 10:30 Eastern, 9:30 Central Time. So again, lots of very big matchups going on this weekend across men's basketball. And then the last thing that we're going to be covering tonight, it's not necessarily really, I mean, sports is really the closest that we could put it in a category, but we also have something that, I mean, I consider to be pretty big. The original Survivor reality TV series on CBS that started back in the year of 2000 has its 50th season coming up. We actually talked about this in our last podcast episode, and they're actually going to be doing a challenge. They're calling it the Survivor 50 Challenge, where a hidden immunity idol, which is something like an advantage that's played on that television show, is going to be hidden in every single state. All 50 states, there's going to be one of them. The top prize is going to be a 3-day trip to Los Angeles, a paid trip to Los Angeles where you will be present for the reunion show, the live season finale, the Survivor 50. And so that's kind of the prize that you can anticipate. And so there's going to be one of those hidden in every single state. And the interesting thing about it is that the clue is going to be dropped in the state of Missouri tomorrow in the afternoon. So just something else that's kind of another one of those big, not necessarily sporting events, although there will be competitions for how you get to the clue. And so there's designated times, there's designated locations for how you can find it. But again, for a chance for basically a free trip to Los Angeles. 3-day free trip to Los Angeles is up for grabs, and the potential is there to get that in all 50 states, with Missouri going to be getting that clue. As far as when the competition will be taking place, that information will be revealed tomorrow afternoon. So, not necessarily a sport. I mean, it is competitive, so we kind of grouped it in that sports category. Well, that is it for tonight on our GWP weekly recap. We will see you next week for the full weekly news on Monday. That is it. Stay safe and have a great weekend.